lose nobody like that ever in my life. I didn't know how to act. But I'm telling you, Fatima, I don't love her like that. And I'm only
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying anything.
I know.
Yes.
Which is nice.
They better. Yeah. So just. Okay. That for you.
I'm gonna ask Rob.
All right. This session of the Bandon Planning Commission is in session at 7:04. Can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Orsi,
Here.
Commissioner Scobie. I think she's on Zoom.
I didn't see her name.
Okay, she might be on there in a little bit. Vice Chair Drukowski.
Here.
Chair Starbuck.
Here.
Commissioner Norman.
Here.
Commissioner Pressler.
All right, consent agenda. We will allocate 5 minutes for anybody that wants to come up and talk or, oh, forget that. Consent agenda. Is everybody happy with it?
Yes.
Is there a motion?
I motion that we accept the consent agenda as written.
Second?
Second.
All right. Have a motion and second on the consent agenda. Consent agenda, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed. Now we can do public comment. Comments from the public on any item not on the agenda limited to 5 minutes each. To comment in person, please sign in and return form to clerk. In participating via Zoom, raise your hand at the beginning of the public comment period. Public comments and information provided during the meeting will be collected and retained by the city as a public record in accordance with Oregon Revised Statutes, Public Records Policy 1920.005 to 192.170 and 357.805 to 8357.895, with some exceptions. Anybody want to speak?
It looks like Sarah Palmer has raised her hand.
All right. Sarah
If
Palmer?
Point of order, Chair, this is for matters that are not coming up on the agenda later on this evening, correct?
Correct.
All right, then I do not have a public comment at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, seeing no other takers, we'll move on. To public hearing 5.1 24-075, a public hearing to consider a request for a conditional use permit and plan review for a new auditorium building at 270 Fillmore Avenue Southeast, Bandon Historical Society. I now declare a public hearing open at 7:07 p.m. this 27th day of February 2025. This is an official public hearing before the Planning Commission of the City of Bandon for planning application 24-075, a conditional use permit and plan review for a new auditorium at the Bandon Historical Society located at 270 Fillmore Avenue Southeast, which is a property in the general commercial and light industrial zones in the city of Bandon. The applicable substantive criteria are contained in the staff report. Please address your comments to these criteria or the criteria you believe to apply to this decision. Official notice is hereby given that the Planning Commission can consider laws, ordinances, court decisions, etc., without having them established as evidence in the hearing record. Record of proceedings, a copy of the minutes of this hearing will be available at the city offices. Publication of rules. A copy of the rules and procedures I am reading will be available in the city offices as part of the file. Are there any abstentions or objections to this to the jurisdiction? Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to challenge whether it is proper for this Planning Commission to hold this hearing? Disclosure by commissioners. Are there any commissioners present who wish to declare ex parte contact?
I am a volunteer at the museum, but it will not interfere with my decision.
I contacted the museum earlier this year about the possibility of a Main Street revitalization grant for this project, but I never saw the plans. So this is the first time I ever saw the plans. Also, I'm a member of the museum and a volunteer for the museum. Plus, the museum has helped me out a lot on my hikes.
Anybody else?
I did a site visit.
Right. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to challenge any of the commission members' qualifications to participate in this hearing? Seeing none, I'll move on. Staff update.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a proposal tonight for an addition to the existing museum space for an auditorium. This is on a property that is split zoned, general commercial and light industrial, kind of an interesting zone. The existing museum is on the corner of Highway 101 and Fillmore Avenue, and the proposed addition is just south of the building along Fillmore. The museum is on the property zoned general commercial, and the auditorium is on the property zoned light industrial. We did review both sets of criteria in our staff report. A museum is listed as a conditional use in both zones, so that's why you're hearing this one tonight. As part of their proposal, it's also requires a plan review for the commercial design standards, the architectural review overlay zone, which is the zone that covers Old Town and some of the surrounding area, the off-street loading and parking, and then there's also the property is located in the city's special flood hazard area. So the staff report, I'm not going to go through all of it because it was 40 pages, but it does cover the floodplain development chapter, administration and enforcement, so our noticing procedures, conditional uses where we reviewed compliance or conformance with the city's comprehensive plan, the general commercial zone criteria, the light industrial, the architectural review overlay zone, commercial design standards, and off-street parking and loading. I'm just going to bring up for you a few of the issues that I discussed in that staff report so that when the applicant comes up, you can ask them any questions that you have. I think one of the things to note, the application was submitted on November 25th, 2024. City staff were delayed in preparing the 30-day completeness review due to the schedule of the holidays and our only staff who is present being ill. Regardless, we were late. We did identify a number of incomplete items. However, the applicant wanted to continue to have the application processed as is, but then also submitted additional information that we had requested. One of those items was that there was no grading plan submitted. There were a number of emails back and forth between the city engineer, city staff, and the applicant with some concerns about the height and the floodplain. So I just handed out to you an email, and if anyone in the audience wants to see it, just an email from our city engineer last Friday with some continued concerns about the elevation. There was also 17.94.090, which is the commercial design standards chapter, has a component about roofing, and that there are you have to have 2 of 3 components that are listed. We just found that there was inadequate information to determine conformance, but we're hoping the applicant can clear that up this evening. For parking, the applicant provided that they have 29 parking spaces. They need 25 to meet the auditorium requirement. They did state that the existing auditorium or the existing museum use and the auditorium will not be used at the same time so that they could do a shared parking. Our code requires if you do that, you do have to provide satisfactory legal evidence for that shared parking requirement. So we did include a condition of approval about requiring that for zoning compliance. The other thing would be that the site is adjacent to a dwelling, so it's not adjacent to a residential zone, but there is a dwelling there, and the way the code is stated, it says if the site is adjacent to a residential zone or adjacent to a dwelling, you should have a 5-foot fence between the two. So you may require a 5-foot fence on the south property line. I didn't include that as a condition of approval in my staff report, so if you do want to add that, make sure that you make a note of that. And then for the floodplain structure, there's a requirement for non-residential construction that the structure either be 1 foot above base flood elevation, or if not, then there's a series of requirements, including flood-proofing the structure. In the applicant's findings, they stated that they were not going to lift it 1 foot above BFE, nor did they intend to flood-proof it. So I think we need some more information about what it is they do intend to do. So yeah, my recommendation to you tonight is to hear from the applicant about any of the concerns that we brought up in our staff report. If you want to approve it, we'd recommend that you approve it with the conditions in the staff report, and then also adopt the procedural staff report as the findings. If you want to deny it, you need to do that based on some specific code provision, so please make that clear. Or if you want to approve the application with modifications, please state those conditions into the record, as well as the modifications that we can put into our findings. So when we get to that point, I'll help you out with a motion. And let me know if you have any questions.
Okay.
I'm not sure if your microphone is on. Up. Yeah.
But it.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, just one point.
just on page 54 of the 143, I just wasn't clear, the yellow lines. So are all those lots part of it that are drawn on that overhead aerial view? Is it, so you see the museum and then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rectangles?
Yeah, I'm not at the page you're talking about, but I think you're talking about the outline of the, yes.
Yes.
So yes, those are all technically owned by the Bandon Historical Society. The plan, I believe, it doesn't go all the way to the south
Right.
property line. Yeah.
Okay. All right, and the other thing you said addition, but it seemed pretty clear in the materials that it was not going to be adjoined to the existing structure. It was going to be a separate structure. Is that correct?
Yes, my understanding from the applicant's plans is that it is a separate structure connected by a breezeway.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions?
Anything else? All right. There are rules for this hearing and general conduct. This hearing is to be orderly and courteous. When it is your turn to testify, please speak clearly and state your name for the minutes clerk. It is recommended that all testimony also be submitted in writing for the record. Please print your name and mailing address on the sign-in sheet that is located on the podium. The applicant will be granted 20 minutes. Testimony from other people will be limited, and it says 3. I'm going to make it 5. 5 minutes per person. After all testimony is taken, the applicant will be given an additional 10 minutes to rebuttal testimony, and then close the hearing. Failure to raise an issue of sufficient specificity to afford this decision-making body and the parties involved an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on the issue. We ready for the applicant's case?
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. Robert S. Robin Miller III, appearing tonight on behalf of the applicant. Don Lynham was a retired pharmacist and a former city councilor. He was my client, an estate planning client. What was interesting about his will is that he didn't want to simply give a bequest of his net assets to the Bandon History Museum, but he wanted to direct it. And being Don Lynham, he was very specific about things. He wanted it to be an auditorium. He wanted it to be on the campus where the Bandon History Museum is right now. He wanted it named the Don and Joan Lynham Auditorium, or whatever we chose to name it. And he had a number of other stipulations, which I negotiated with him into the will. One of them was that he wanted it completed and usable within 5 years of the date of his death. I tried working with him when I put together the will. I said, please, can we make it 5 years from the date that probate closes? Or I tried to buy as much time as possible, knowing construction and planning and permitting. But he said, no, 5 years from the date of my death. And so thank you to planning staff and all of you for kind of consenting to this tumbling approach where, we've more or less got the application going, got a hearing set. Yes, it's perhaps a little bit messy where things have tumbled in, a little bit late and here and there, but thank you for conceding to this process tonight. I was invited to present not too long ago, so I'm not fully up on all the details. Representatives from the Bandon History Museum and Sherry McGrath, who shepherded and cheerleaded a lot of the details will be able to speak on specifics tonight. Big picture, we'd be grateful for your support in approving the conditional use so that we can proceed to the next steps of compliance and ultimate construction. In big picture, we agree with everything that the planning staff has recommended as conditions of approval. I imagine that we're okay with the fence too, from the house on the south. As to the specific conditions, I guess jumping to that right now, one thing that I heard was that we might want to ask for some rewording of the parking condition. The reasoning being is that I think the museum, as it is, was already permitted without any kind of requirement for parking. Later on, the lot that is presently used for parking was added onto the Abandoned History Museum ownership. And then the rest of the parcels came as late as 2017, I think. So I think thematically, you might say that you don't need to account for or manage parking for the museum itself as part of this application. We can consider it to be in its own boat. But then again, I can see an argument saying that, hey, if it's a structure that's, connected or clearly used in conjunction with the museum, we want some kind of coordination and we want to prevent any kind of parking issues. So while the museum staff may have indicated that, the auditorium might be nighttime, the museum might be daytime, I can foresee times in which, like an open house, that everything's being used concurrently. So one way or another, we may want to ask for that condition pertaining to parking to be softened a little bit so that we don't have to, feel bad if there's ever a time where both structures are being used concurrently. As to other matters, again, I can't speak greatly to details. I imagine I'll be inviting Sherry McGrath to speak to some of the things that Dana just said, namely about the design requirements. I imagine that they are already part of the project, if not specifically depicted. So I imagine that's pretty easily solvable. The floodplain thing, I now know more about floodplain than I ever wanted to know based on me flipping through the staff report this morning. My understanding is that in some schools of thought, it's okay to use the base flood elevation level as disclosed in the initial survey that sort of like informed the ultimate flood insurance rate map. The initial survey showed for Bandon 15.2 feet, whereas the firm map that came out said 16 feet for Bandon. That's a difference of 10 inches. And whether the floor level has to be built at the stipulated base flood level or whether a foot must be added, I imagine that's all easily solvable. This is not a case where we're proposing a 2 or 3 story structure where we're bumping up against a 35 or 45 foot height limit, and therefore exactly how many inches is the base flood level stipulated to be at issue. Whatever the finding you want is something that is easily solved and built according to the specifications. And the other thing I'll note is, yes, we are cheerfully and openly having our cake and eating it too. It is a separate, it was designed and planned to be a separate structure for fire safety regulations and this and that. It makes a whole lot more sense to have a separate structure than to conceive of it as a physical addition onto the existing one. But we're trying to have our cake and eat it too by making it look, design and harmonious with the existing one and connecting it with, I guess, non-structural elements, like kind of a gangplank, if I understand it, between two structures, and maybe some kind of a roofing thing. So we are having our cake and eat it too, but from a regulatory standpoint, there are 2 separate structures. So I think I'll yield time to Sherry McGrath to answer questions on the details. Thank you for coming out this evening. We all know that we could all be watching TV tonight and enjoying cocktails, but we appreciate you coming out and helping us with this project. Are there any questions you have of me before I yield to Sherry McGrath?
So it sounds like you're thinking to all the staff conditions.
Yes. Yes. Noting the parking, I think it's condition number 7. We're asking for a rewordsmithing of it about the parking. Oh.
Used at separate times and then but just personally, and this is for Dana. If there were no
Could you
requirements.
turn your microphone on? I'm
Oh,
having
it is
a hard
on.
time.
Maybe I'm just not close enough. Oh, okay. If there were no requirements for parking for the museum, I don't see how we can require more than what's required for this addition. That's just a question for you. If there was not any required parking previously, and that was a question when I was going through this, since it seemed that we weren't sure what the requirement was when the museum
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have an answer for that either. I was asking Shayla, how long has the museum been there? And maybe the applicant can answer
So-
that, but
Well, it sounds like what Mr. Miller said is that there were no requirements for parking at the time the museum was established. So wouldn't that mean we wouldn't be able to say, well, you've got to have more than what's required just for this building?
sure, I understand what so you're saying like if the museum had zero required parking spaces and this one only had 25, then by having 29 parking spaces, they would be exceeding
Yeah.
the number of parking spaces
Yes.
that they need. Sure,
And
I
so-
think you can make that finding,
Okay.
and then modify or just get rid of that condition.
Because I certainly see where you have speakers at the museum on a Saturday morning or something at the time it's open, and
Mhm.
it seems like it'd be easier just not to put any conditional requirement for the parking.
Sure. I think we haven't seen any evidence, I guess, either way. I haven't seen anything on paper that says there's no requirement for it or not. They
Okay.
didn't submit that in their application, so.
All
But I
right,
appreciate that. That's a great,
thank you.
thanks.
Okay, thank you. To restate, our purpose here is not to bang our fist on the podium and say, no, you cannot regulate the museum that's already been in place. We're here to be congenial. We understand that there's sort of a public interest in having well-coordinated parking, and we're willing to do that and to agree to words that kind of reflect that commitment.
I understand that. I just, when I went through it, we didn't know of a requirement for the existing museum, I didn't see how
Mhm.
we could require more than what this building requires. So,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Preslar, it could be you're being a better advocate for the museum than I am. So thank you very much.
all right, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll yield to Sherry McGrath at this point. Thank you.
And I just would like to make the comment that there is the public parking that is fairly accessible across the,
I agree.
just across the street.
Street parking's pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
By the way, I'll let the record note that Commissioner Scobie is present and on Zoom.
And I apologize for signing in late.
No, thank you.
Good evening, Sherry
You have a new 20 minutes.
Oh, is that what we do?
Yeah,
Okay, apologize.
go ahead.
Sherry McGrath, business owner. I'm primarily here to answer direct questions. There were a lot of things that came up in the application. As far as the parking was concerned, we did a recent chain of title on the properties to see what the history was, who owned the properties before the museum or the historical society and before the city abandoned. That's how we know, factual information that the museum was there in 2002, the parking lot was there in 2003, and then the rest of the properties in 2017. So it was my opinion that that falls under non-conforming uses, which in Chapter 17, 108 talks about specifically the use of the land as well as structures and the use. Thank you for considering the parking situation. What we don't want to create is a situation where we're non-compliant, let's say 5 years down the road, because all of a sudden we have overlapping. And that's the concern I think we have with the way it's worded right now with the legal agreement for shared parking. So for the floodplain information, so floodplain certificates are established by a professional land surveyor. So our land surveyor, I had 16 feet, he had 15.2. So that's where that kind of, that's why it started there. And it's in our favor if it's 15.2, because we do want to have a slight ramp into the other building without it being too steep. We can make that work with 1 foot above BFE. It'll just be a little bit trickier to design, no problem. So the upgraded or the updated elevation certificate will be submitted with zoning compliance when we have our final plans that show the details and of where the elevations are at, how that's getting constructed. What you see today is a conceptual plan. We didn't want to take it any further until we had approval to proceed. And that's true with the civil engineering for the site work as well. That's who will be handling the curb cuts, the ADA ramps, the details associated with the public works permit, the grading aspect of the site itself. As far as the roof is concerned, the elevations show dimensions for every single overhang. So it varies between 12 inches, there's 3 foot, there's 6 foot. So I think the question is, what needs to be clarified, or how can we better satisfy that without constructing a parapet? A parapet on that building will look very strange. It'll be in direct conflict with what the commercial design standards and the architectural overlay are really trying to do, which is beautify. You know, there are times where a parapet is needed. This is not the time for that. So if there's a way that we can clarify that maybe with staff today and see how we can satisfy that, or if it can become a condition of approval that we can look at that during zoning compliance, that would be okay with us as well.
I had a question on that. So you're saying that you will have the overhangs of at least 3 feet past the supporting wall?
That is shown, if you look at the, what would be the east elevation, the front entry, it shows a 3-foot overhang extending to the south. Technically, it extends also on the north side, but you don't see that because we have that, a false wall, not false wall, but more like a trim piece to hide the gap between the buildings. So it looks like it's continuous, but technically it's an overhang.
And you'll have a sloping roof with 3 or more planes?
We have 3 different roof planes. We have the main roof pitch that matches the existing museum. The section between the 2 buildings has a lower pitch. That's intentional so that we're not being supported at all by the existing structure. It just ties in underneath the gable. And then our porches have a different slant. You know, we have the shed roof over the ADA ramp, and then we also have the gables.
That's all you had to have was 2 of the 3. So if you have those 2, it didn't look like you had to have the parapet.
That was my interpretation as well. Thank you.
Can you tell me more about the type of gravel you were considering using for the parking lot?
Ideally, we would use, I'll say this because I went to a job site of mine yesterday morning and they did a great job. So I want to find out what that surface was because it was very durable, it's very well compacted, and was not loose. And oftentimes around here, we find a really loose gravel because it's the easiest one to find. So
I know they sell the kind that's not loose just because of all the things I had to have done for my project.
yes.
So that's why I was asking. You don't want round because a round is going to be loose. You want the other kind. Can I think of the term? No, but I know it exists and it can be packed very well and it's not going to be dusty. It's not going to be a problem. It's not going to go onto the road if it's done properly.
Correct. The city has historically viewed gravel parking lots as dustless and durable. And I've had projects in the past where they put a condition of approval that during summer months, if it became dusty, that we'd have to water it down. And that seemed to suffice in the past. With this being a community project that's on a very strict budget and timeline, we would like to avoid asphalting unnecessarily. And the problem also with paving a parking lot is it creates more stormwater runoff.
Right.
You know, at least with the impervious surface, the ground is able to absorb that. It also meets the intention of the floodplain construction without bringing more fill into that space as well. I was going to recommend, if the parking lot was an issue, that you could adopt a condition of approval similar to the landscape one that says more or less at such a time where you're not maintaining your parking lot, then you're subject to citation because you're out of compliance with your conditional use permit.
Right. How about what are your do you have detailed plans? I should ask about how the plumbing and the sewer is gonna be hooked up for the city. I mean, that was kind of sketchy.
The Public Works Department said that they wanted us to tie into the existing. So I know the surveyor's been working on that piece of it. They've been doing some locates and needing to do a little bit more work and on-site conversations with Public Works, but we're not bringing in any new sewer laterals or water laterals.
Thank you.
So you'll be using what the museum is using? Is that the idea?
Correct. Currently, there are 3 restrooms within the museum. Is that right? Yes. 1 in the office and 2 in the main, well, 1 old one that's not ADA compliant and then a newer one that is.
So I'm really confused regarding this floodplain elevation. I don't know how important, if it's 16 or if it's 15.2, I have no idea, but one of the things that I'm concerned about is that you want to plan a building right next to the museum. And so what are you going to do to mitigate? I mean, if the auditorium is sitting higher than the museum is, no. How are you going to protect the museum, I guess, from flood damage? That's what I'm wondering about. If the auditorium is higher, or it's going to be the same level or lower, or, do we know?
Well, they're two separate structures, so the new structure is not required to bring the other structure up into full compliance. That structure is very old. Is
Yes.
1936, Jim?
Wasn't it a city building at some point?
It was City Hall, and it was built to be a temporary City Hall after the fire. So, that in a major flood event, that structure is going to experience damage. That is one of the other reasons why building a new auditorium that has some extra storage space to put valuable documents in and get those out of the floodplain has also been very important. We did design a little bit of bonus room attic space in the auditorium for not heavy storage documents, but we do have some extra space for that purpose. But to your point, our foundation right now is designed to be solid filled, meaning the floodwaters would go around it and not underneath of it. So it would not cause damage to the new structure whatsoever, which that means, it's going to flow south, in other words. Ideally away from the existing building. Again, we can't control what flood damage happens to the existing building.
Another thing that I was going to ask, and Robin said something about being okay with the south side fence so that you're protecting the neighbors. That is something you've all agreed on?
Yes, we haven't spoken in a board meeting about it, but I did bring that up to the board president recently, that if that was going to become a condition of approval, I think that's something we can all live with. Do you agree? Yes.
Yeah, as someone who experiences light in the back of my house from someone else, it'd be nice to prevent that for someone if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to remain good neighbors.
Right.
This is a community project, and we're just we'd like to build something that benefits the neighborhood and the entire community.
Yes.
Well, acknowledging you're not the fire marshal, I'm curious about if you happen to know the difference in the fire standards between having a breezeway and having the auditorium actually connected to the museum wall.
Mm-hmm. If it was connected, if it was a true addition, then the existing structure would have to comply with the fire code for all of the square footage combined. Being two structures on the same lot, we still look at the fire exits. So the back door exit that is now kind of going into the auditorium in a way. We have double doors, right? I think you've seen that on the plan. We have a door on the new auditorium side and a door on the existing side, and that is part of the fire barrier. And those will remain intact for that reason. Our new wall is probably going to be fire rated at 3 hour, definitely minimum of 2, but I'm considering a 3 hour in this situation. And the breezeway itself is also going to be built on its own foundation with its own walls and be fire rated.
So the breezeway is not going to be open, or it is?
It is not.
Okay.
There is a gap between the building, but where you enter into the auditorium itself, there will be a floor elevation change. So there'll be a slight slope down. Otherwise, it doesn't work, especially with the floodplain piece. So there's going to be a slight slope. At 15.2, it was less than half of an inch. So now we're talking about more inches, and that'll be my problem to figure out, and I don't have a problem doing that. Coming out of the office into the auditorium, that may end up being more of a breezeway where we are at ground level and then step into that. And when I get into the structural details on that, now that we have a concurrence on the final base flood elevation and wanting to build 1 foot above, we want to avoid floodproofing if we can. But if it doesn't work structurally, we may have to come back with floodproofing evidence in order to get that elevation that ramp. You know, we have to account for ADA and slopes.
So if the auditorium was flood-proof, would that not provide more protection to the museum building?
Sure. So all buildings are flood proofed. You know, the FEMA flood, your foundation always has to meet the foundation criteria. So more often than not, we see floodplain vents, right? You know, similar to your foundation vents, but they're made specifically for floods. And then all of your, you know, anything that's built in that understory area has to be, you know, marine grade lumber or concrete, pressure treated. FEMA has a list of acceptable materials. In this case, we have decided to avoid that because it'll cause less damage to the building in the future if the floodwater just goes around it altogether instead of through it and causing damage to the undercarriage. So there wouldn't be standing water under our foundation, so that would benefit the existing structure for sure.
And am I to assume that the existing structure has none of that in terms of flood protection or?
It does have a crawl space, and because it was built as a temporary structure, it doesn't have a solid perimeter foundation. So actually, you know, in that regard, water does have the ability to flow underneath and through the structure. But you'll see, and you know, because you've been to the site, when you're at Highway 101, it looks like you're right at ground level. And then it kind of raises up towards the back or the south side. So water would trickle down in that area for sure. But if that building were to be brought up to FEMA standards, it would be so expensive that you would probably end up having to demo and start over. And being that it's a huge part of our history in Bandon, avoiding that was our goal.
Mhm.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other testimony for the applicant? All right. Now we're ready for rebuttal evidence. Do the applicants have any rebuttals testimony at this time?
If I may, Mr. Chair, it sounded like Sarah Palmer from the tribe may have wanted to say something. If she's still online, we might specifically invite her at this point.
Okay. Ms. Palmer?
Thank you, Chair. That's correct. I wouldn't say that I am speaking in rebuttal, but I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words. My name is Sarah Palmer. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Manager for the Coquille Indian Tribe. And we had previously, as I believe Mr. Miller has alluded to, this has been kind of a rolling process of design review on this project. And as I'm sure that the Planning Commission is aware of, we often have archaeological concerns that arise in downtown Bandon. And so our office had sent a letter of comment toward the end of last year, I believe, regarding this proposal. I wanted to let the commission know that all of our concerns there were resolved. I want to particularly single out Jim Prohl for his research and the work that he's done. We are in support of the development of community facilities like this. Mr. Lynham's vision is, I think, really remarkable, and I see this being an asset to the community and for everyone who lives here. And based on what I have had shared with me by museum volunteers and the project proponents, and subject to their agreements for development of an inadvertent discovery plan, we are prepared to provide archaeological monitoring as a pro bono contribution to this project in support of this work. And yeah, I just really wanted to say we're excited about this. We're looking forward to it, and it's going to be a real asset to the community. And I appreciate the applicant's diligence in addressing concerns, which I think is also sort of relevant to some of what I've heard from members of the commission this evening. So they've been working well with me to answer questions, and I'm confident that they will work well with you as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other testimony? All right. Staff comment?
Thanks. I'm busy typing over here, updating a findings document for you. So I want to make sure I understood what was discussed during this meeting, and I'm going to read it into the record if that's okay. So because, and you can choose to adopt these or not in your deliberation, but because the existing museum building was never required to provide parking, only the additional structure will require the provision of additional parking spaces. The plan shows 29 parking spaces, which exceeds the minimum required of 25. The applicant has agreed to use the 16 feet NVGD, I think is what that is, as their base flood elevation, and will elevate the structure 1 foot above base flood elevation. The roof contains at least a 3-foot overhang, and there are 3 sloping roofs with at least, sloping roofs with at least 3 planes. And the applicant will provide a 5-foot site obscuring fence along the south property line, and we'll just replace condition of approval number 7, which was the parking one, with the fence, so that we don't have to change anything else. And then you would just adopt the procedural staff report as written otherwise.
So Dana, I have a question about the parking.
Please.
Do we have any clue on any level what the volume of traffic is at the museum?
I could not answer that.
We have a pretty big parking lot as it stands right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have data about how many cars are like going by, like what the traffic volume is on Highway 101 and Fillmore intersection. I don't know how many of them are going to the museum. I don't know if the museum has numbers about maybe how many visitors they have on an average day or in peak summer. But that might be something we could ask them. I don't have that information though.
Okay.
There is one thing that occurs when they do visit the museum, though. They're not always going to be driving to the museum. If they're around
Mhm.
Old Town, there are people that will be pedestrians that will visit.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, even if they give you numbers, I would anticipate it would
Sure.
be difficult to really ascertain how many of them are actually parking in the lot. And there's some of the volunteers that will walk. I mean, there's a lot of variances.
Sure, and our code, the way that we decide how many parking spaces you have is usually based on the size of the structure, how many employees you have, and not on your average visitorship. But it would be interesting to know anyway.
I did like the suggestion to add to condition of approval number 5, maintaining the parking lot as well as the landscape.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, good idea.
Maintaining, failure to maintain the gravel parking lot and landscaping?
I think you could just, your condition of approval number 5, I
Yeah.
think you could just add it to that.
Absolutely, okay, got it.
Good point.
And again, this is for 29 spaces.
29 parking spaces is what they are providing.
Okay.
So in excess of what they would require if they had max occupancy of the auditorium.
Okay. And I'm still a little uncertain about the floodplain elevation. Does this matter whether it's 16 or 15.2?
I think if you ask the folks at FEMA, they would say yes. My understanding of the floodplain rate is that these are, the 16 is sort of a general number. I was just trying to look to get a little bit of more information about what numbers local governments are supposed to use when they make these determinations. And so when those firm maps or firmets are adopted, they have those numbers in them. So for a zone AE, I think it is, they're always 16. I think there might be actual numbers that are different, but my understanding is at least from what I just read, it says to use the number that's on the adopted firm. The only time that you use the other number is if you don't have that adopted firm map. And I think that the numbers are to ensure that you're constructing your building safely above wherever they expect a flood to occur. So FEMA, because they are issuing flood insurance, right, they want to protect the structures that they're insuring. So I would say that's why it matters.
And one of the other points that was brought up, I believe, that I read was that also ensures that you're not gonna end up with a lot of buildings that are deserted because people can't.
Can't do anything to them, right? Yeah. Yeah, and that comes from if you want to invest in the structure, if you're in the floodplain and you put in more than 50% of the value of the structure, which you just talked about, you'd have to elevate it out of the floodplain. That does, for some properties that are not high value, it can be really hard to invest in those and improve them. So they want to make sure you're safely out of any danger, probably of just having to pay out for insurance, but also to protect your assets.
Check the town as well.
Yes.
And yes, it sounds like there's some details to be worked out, but this is a complete application that we're considering, right?
Yeah, I believe that after all of the additional information was submitted, we had enough, especially what we've heard tonight, we had enough information to make a decision.
And the application was submitted before the changes to the FEMA floodplain regulations. So we're applying a different set than what would be applied if the application came in today. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the applicant submitted their application on November 25th, 2024, and those new regulations went into effect, I think, on December 1st or December 3rd, something like
Okay.
that. So yeah, these are under the city's existing code standards. Anything submitted after that December date are subject to the new changes at the state level.
Okay. And I would be in support of the 5-foot fence. I think parking isn't really an issue. I think there's plenty of parking in the general area and they're exceeding the requirement. I think it's a wonderful project. And I love the cooperation with the tribe and it sounds like it was a two-way communication, which shows the commitment to the process. So those are all my comments.
And did you have anything to add? That's all we have.
Okay. Any other, are there any, I don't think we talked about rebuttal applicants. Is there any rebuttal to this project? Okay. So we're at a point we could close the hearing. Is that correct?
Sorry, yes, that's correct. You can close the hearing and then deliberate towards a decision.
Okay, I close this hearing at 7:52. And now we can go into comments by the commissioners. None?
I think it's a good project.
I'm in favor of
With
the
the changes
project with
we-
the changes. Sorry.
Okay.
I interrupted you.
Do you think we have enough evidence to do it at this time?
I do, yes.
I do.
All right, so we won't need to continue to another date. So at this point in time, we can talk about a motion.
Can we so move with all the things that you, because I'm never going
Or
to
do I need
remember
to
them
read
all.
them in?
What is the
I'm
best way?
I'm asking for some legal help here.
Okay,
Okay, so I'm gonna read something for you. I
Okay.
think you can say, I move to approve the application as submitted with the conditions in the staff report and the modifications that we strike condition number 7 about parking and would add in a condition instead that says the applicant will provide a 5-foot site obscuring fence along the south property line. And then we would modify condition number 5 to include the parking lot in the requirement for ongoing maintenance. And that you would also make the findings that I earlier read into the record. Do I have to read them again? Okay. And that you would also adopt the procedural staff report dated February 27th, 2025 as the findings. Can someone say so moved? Someone is allowed to just say so moved.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Orsi.
Yes.
Commissioner Scobie.
Yes.
Vice Chair Jarkowski.
Yes.
Chair Starbuck. Oh, you don't want to vote. Commissioner Norman.
Yes.
Commissioner Pressler.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion passed.
Congratulations.
All right, now we're,
Mr. Chair, thank you for your time. We appreciate your consideration.
you're welcome, Mr. Miller.
And I just want to note, because of the time frame, we did prepare findings for you. So Chair Starbuck, before you go, I'll have you sign those and then we can send out the notice tomorrow to get you guys moving along really quickly.
All right,
Yay.
okay. Where are we?
Oh, about 140 pages later.
Yeah, I'm trying to find,
Literally.
yeah, staff update.
Sorry, I turned my mic off. I have a couple and then I'm going to toss it over to Solon, who's got a few more updates for you. I wanted to let you know that I think we've got a bunch of code amendments that we're going to have to discuss coming up. One of which is FEMA, so this is relevant to what we just talked about. We do have to adopt those new required standards by June. And so that will come to you in April. I think next month we'll do a little refresher of everything so that April isn't, the public hearing isn't a big surprise to you. Same with master plan developments. We've been talking about those. We'll bring that back to you in just a quick work session next month before it comes to you in a public hearing in April. And also, we are working on a housing code update project with Cascadia Partners, and they've identified one particular section of the housing code that needs to be updated also by June. So you will have another public hearing in April to consider those housing code updates. I believe they're pretty specific to duplexes, and so we'll have that language to you in April as well. I'm going to try to do those all work session in March, so you're not surprised about the content, and then you'll have the public hearing in April. Other than that, Solon, can you see if that mic works? Otherwise, you can come up to, okay. Solon's got a bunch of updates for you. Okay.
La, la, la. Hello, you know me, I'm Solwyn. So I have a couple of updates pertaining to citizen involvement. The first one is that today we had a successful first meeting with our City Park Master Plan Advisory Committee and Dirty Landscape Architects, which are the architecture firm that we have contracted to do our master plan update for City Park. It was a really good meeting. Good information was provided by DLA, and the advisory committee gave really good feedback. It was overall a very positive experience. We also are going to be having an open house or a public outreach meeting for the City Park Master Plan update. It's going to be on March 26th from 5 to 7 p.m. at the barn. We're going to be seeking feedback from the public on the proposed improvements from DLA. And if you love the park, I highly encourage that you come. There will be many opportunities for the public to be providing their feedback on the ideas. Yeah. Also, our Architectural Review Overlay Zone Update Advisory Committee had their second meeting this month, and there's really great work being done by that group of volunteers. In addition, we are seeking people who are interested in being part of a Viewline Advisory Committee, and hopefully the first meeting for that will take place on March 12th, which is a Wednesday. The time has not been decided yet. We are also seeking people who are interested in being a part of the Housing Advisory Committee. And if you're interested in being a part of either of these committees, reach out to planning@bandon-or.gov. Send an email with your name and expressing your interest, and we will get back to you. And yeah, that's my updates.
Thanks. And I just have two other quick ones. We did have an open house for the transportation system plan earlier this month. If anyone didn't get a chance to take the survey, I have paper copies here for you. This was specific to the Highway 101 updates, and the survey is also still available on the city's website, as is the open house, the online open house. So you can still go through all of the data and information that was shared. The survey does close tomorrow. If that deadline doesn't work for you, please email me. We're happy to keep it open for you. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was we did inadvertently send something out on the city's website about a town hall that we are hoping to have, Solon has mentioned. That happened in January, and the world picked it up. Unfortunately, they didn't get our second email that said we rescind this email. And so they did post something in the newspaper. If you saw that, we are not having that meeting this in March. We are still hoping to have it later, but it was advertised as being next month. And I don't want anyone to show up at the barn that night and be wildly disappointed. The city council has asked us to provide a little bit more information to them before we move forward with that event. And so Solon and I are putting that together for their consideration. Any questions for us? And I'm sorry I didn't get you a written report this month. That was, it was a little bit busy with, we don't normally have a planning commission meeting on a Thursday and then a city council meeting on Monday. So I've been doing nothing but packets for a little while. So I apologize. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So do we have any sort of an update on filling our open commissioner position?
I believe that there might be some interest in keeping it open for a little longer. So we'll hopefully have an answer for you soon.
So they're not going to decide it Monday.
They're not going to decide it on Monday. So we're going to have to wait a little longer. It's not usually that fast. We want to have the right person. You know, you guys have such a great vibe up there.
Really?
We've got a great vibe.
You all get along very well. So we want to make sure we get the right person in that seat. That's right. The vibe.
All right. Is there any comments from the,
I have a question about the grid that we worked on
Yes.
back in October and November,
Yes.
which I found very useful, and I know you put a lot of work into it. I know that you did a pretty good review of it. I still use it.
Oh, good.
I want to find something out, I then go to the code itself, but
Yeah. I think we could still do it. It seemed like it was kind of a big task to get what we needed to have adopted with the grid and then everything that kind of came along with that. And so we could try it again. You have a lot coming up in April, so we could try to program it for May or June and see if you get a little bit more traction then. I think there was some concern that it was a bit too much too soon, so.
no, it was just right.
I thought I'd publish the thing and sell it.
Oh, yeah, I know. I've sent it out. I call it my cheat sheet. So, you know, if people want to use it, they certainly can, but it hasn't been adopted into the code yet.
I just wanted to speak briefly on the transportation. Open house, I just felt like there was a lot of hard work that went into all of the process, and that I feel like it's important for us to move forward on one of the options.
That it?
And I thank the staff for all their hard work. Thank you.
We need, this is like scattershot. I think we need to work on this a little bit because I didn't know where to go on this thing.
Okay.
We need to work on this a little bit more. I don't like the bullet idea. I think the straight paragraph would be better.
Okay. We'll take a look at it and we'll see if we can make it look a little easy, better for you.
Commissioner
Thanks.
Norman,
Yes,
comments?
I have none.
Pressler, Commissioner Pressler. Okay. All right, it is 8:04. I declare this meeting adjourned.
So we don't have a citizens advisory committee.
No, well,
It's
she
not on, it's not on the agenda.
update, but the advisory. He gave us the update.